Hello, my name is Gene Olinger. I'm a principal advisor for the MRI Global and will be presenting to you today. So I've been a microbiologist for most of my career, focusing on immunology and virology, although I do a little bit of bacteriology as well. I've been involved with a lot of outbreak responses and recovery stages using the One Health approach that MRI Global uses, and I've been associated with working with Ebola viruses, Marburg virus, which is a sister virus of Ebola, SARS-1, and Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome in the past, and now, of course, with COVID-19. I have, greater than 20 years of experience working in high containment situations with these viruses that are highly lethal, and have worked in a variety of global health groups and committees, and of course, worked abroad in other countries. So the topic of the day really is to understand more about how did COVID-19 evolve and arrive into our lives, and of course, is this a warning for the future? And then really to give you a background about outbreaks, pandemics, and genetic spillover, and how evolutionary pressures are causing this to happen, and why we need to be aware of it and work towards solutions in the future. So MRI Global is a nonprofit based in Kansas City, and we've had over 75 years of experience working in this area of research. We've done everything from agricultural work to chemistry to cancer research to now infectious disease work for the past 20 years. We do a lot of engineering work as well, and so we're very committed to helping mankind solve its issues that we need to resolve to make a safer and a more sustainable environment. So mankind's suffering from disease has been going on for some time. It's nothing new. Even the art of the past shows our issues with epidemics and outbreaks and how they have created havoc for us. And we are currently it's interesting, we've evolved together as a society, but we've also evolved with the pathogens themselves. So we live with microbes in our body that don't cause us disease. And then we have microbes that are the small percentage of which that actually do cause disease. So these are kind of important things for us to think about as we go through this talk today. And microbe wars, it's kind of an interesting topic area, is that not just us versus the microbes, but the microbes themselves are fighting each other. And for eons, even before mankind existed, the microbes were actually developing techniques to actually fight each other and to fight over space, to fight over nutrients. And so they've been doing this for a long time, way before mankind was involved in this. And so even though we talk about some of these things happening recently, these are ongoing wars that have been going on for a long time. And it's all about survival in a really harsh environment, the same for humans as it is for bacteria and for viruses and for parasites. I like to always show the history of pandemics, and this is a beautiful illustration from the Visual Capitalist, and it really shows kind of the history over time of outbreaks that we have recorded, and of course the size of those. Now, some of these were bacterial, some of them were viral, so kind of the drawings are just kind of give you an idea of time and also the size of the outbreak itself. And so the largest outbreak really was the bubonic plague outbreaks, which are but also called Black Death. And over 200 million people over a period of time died from this disease. It essentially wiped out the medieval times. It wiped out most of Europe. More than 50% of the population was wiped out by this bacteria. And it was a bacteria that came on rats, and it was transmitted from fleas to humans. And so it was really kind of an interesting dynamic, and it's really consistent with pathogens that have happened in the past. This was not a virus, it was a bacteria. But it just shows you the number of people that were impacted by this. The second largest outbreak really that has plagued mankind for a long time has been smallpox. And smallpox has been there's recorded potential evidence of smallpox going all the way back to times in which early Egypt. So smallpox is a disease that has been eradicated, fortunately, too. It's a viral disease that has been eradicated. So mankind's efforts to vaccinate and then, of course, to control the virus spread over time allowed for it to be eradicated from the earth. And of course, we have the Spanish flu and the plague of Justinian. These were also plagues that affected mankind in large numbers of people. I do like to put it in perspective as the size of this current coronavirus outbreak, and we hope it's going to stay this small and not get much larger. But as you can see in this small little dot there, it's about 6.4 thousand at the time. But this has risen a little bit since that time frame. But it's a very small outbreak compared to these others. So keep that into context of the sizes of some of these larger outbreaks that have occurred. And then we have what we call really epidemics. And epidemics are HIV, for example. HIV/AIDS has been an epidemic that started in the 1980s and has continued. And so we still have that worldwide, and we have to worry about that and treat for that as well. And then we have these kind of outbreaks that occur that are sporadic. Now some discuss about a 100-year cycle, but it's not, doesn't hold up to be a 100-year cycle all the time. And so, but it is in that realm of a decade organism that comes forward and spills over into mankind. And it's a constant struggle for mankind, infectious disease, that is. And so, in tuberculosis, for example, there's been 1 billion deaths due to tuberculosis. Smallpox killed a great deal of people since antiquity. And of course, malaria continues to kill a lot of people every year. Plague, influenza, cholera, and AIDS. So you can kind of get an idea of the sizes that infectious disease causes to mankind. Some of these are more suited to mankind. So tuberculosis, smallpox, these are diseases that are very, have found a niche within the human population and are able to spread fairly simply between each other. And then you have diseases like malaria that are spread by mosquitoes. And so those have taken a lot more effort, but still continue to plague mankind and cause issues in our lives. I always like to remind people that while I'm a virologist, I also work on bacteria as well. And more than 1.5 million people a year lose their lives to tuberculosis, and more than 60 million a year, more than 10 million a year will actually get tuberculosis. So it's a range of a disease that, again, has been documented all the way back to ancient Egypt and before. And so we need to make sure we keep that in mind as we try to eradicate this. There's a goal by 2030 to eradicate TB from the earth, just like we did with smallpox. And I remind people, too, that more than 600 children a day die under the age of 5 in India alone from TB that is undiagnosed and untreated. So that's just the kind of the tip of the iceberg of what TB is causing in mankind. So we need to be very careful and make sure that we're actually spending the right amount of time and effort to eradicate TB as well. And that's an epidemic that has occurred in our lives. So the other big issue that's underlying this COVID-19 right now and has been going on for several years, so for several decades now, is this global impact of antimicrobial resistance. And antimicrobial resistance is something that we don't spend a lot of time on unless you're working in the field understanding this, but we have a lot of losses that are occurring because of AMR. That's the acronym that's often used for this. And right now, by 2050, we will have one person die every 3 seconds. So penicillin was the kind of savior after World War II to save people from infections. And from it, of course, it worked really well in those early stages. But remember, these microbes have been fighting each other for a long time. So it just took a little time for resistance to be developed. And right now, we have many cases of resistance in TB, for example, but also in other just diseases that normally would have been taken care of by good technique and by our host immune response taking over and controlling it. Now we can't do that. So this is a really important thing for us to think about. Again, a great number of children die from this. It's a traveler's issue with people bringing them back and forth. So global spread of these AMR strains is pretty common now. So we have to watch out for that as well. But right now we have about 700,000 AMR-related deaths a year, and some of these deaths occur. It's a shocking moment to see someone pass away from a disease where we have nothing to do. We can't treat them, and they have septicemia. I've personally experienced this in my family, and it's something that, it's just heartbreaking to know that there's nothing you can do, and you watch your loved one pass away. So it's something we need to be careful about and watch. And resistance really is an interesting spread. It includes this One Health approach, what we keep talking about, is important because, again, it spreads through animals into our food chain supply, sometimes in plants. So we have a great deal of resistance that's circulating within our plant/food cycles. And then we have, of course, we spread it to each other. And then, of course, the antibiotics are getting into the environment. So there's a lot of resistance that's being developed, and we need to watch out for that. And we need to be cognizant of how we as an individual can participate in making sure AMR does not spread further. The most important thing is always take your medications. When your physician gives you a clinician or physician gives you your prescription, make sure you complete them and don't stop somewhere in the middle once you start feeling well, because that's when the resistance does develop. We've been repeatedly attacked by pathogens for a long time now. And in the past 20 years, we started to keep an eye on these and saying, okay, where do they rise from, what's going on, how lethal they were. And this is a nice diagram that's been shown by a variety of folks working in outbreak and pandemic response work, showing that these newly emerging, which are shown in red, and re-emerging, those are shown in blue, and where they come from. And it used to be this idea that they all come from the tropics, they all come from places where people have low income and can't control things. But if you look here, it really is not the truth. We have a lot of cases of diseases that occur throughout the world, and we have to watch out for it and in any part of the world. So it's an important thing for us to keep in mind as we start to move forward with resistance and reemergence and, of course, newly emerging pathogens. And history does repeat itself. In 1918, the Spanish flu took the world over, and it occurred in two phases, just like we're seeing now with COVID-19. And even then, people wore masks to protect each other, and it was also a lot of people who didn't want to wear masks, even in 1918, that thought it was not helpful. So a lot of things we do are basically repeated in our lives, and history repeats itself, and that's the good and bad of history. So we do know that masks do reduce airborne transmission, so it's important to wear a mask. And we also know that we've had a lot of deaths now. So I find this kind of heartbreaking to know that my career has been focused on trying to stop outbreaks or prevent what's happening right now. And yet I knew 3 people that's on this list from the New York Times that occurred back in the late spring, early summer, which is kind of shocking to see that there's a list of people who've passed away from a disease that we knew eventually something would happen like this, and then to see their names on a list. It's very important to know your enemy when you think about virology and pathology and, of course, infectious disease. And so it's important to know the enemy, and we've learned more and more about this disease as time goes on. It's quite remarkable given the amount of time that has occurred. This would have taken decades of research to get to the point we are now, but the research is moving so quickly. We really know more about this disease than it took us for 20 years to understand about HIV, for example. So it's very exciting to see technology, science being applied to this new pathogen, despite the negative things that this virus has caused. But it's kind of exciting to see how science and technology are in play and helping know this virus and be able to find solutions for it. So what do we know at this point? We know this is a coronavirus from a large group of family of viruses, and that the coronaviruses, there's 3,000 plus coronaviruses known, and there's only a few that cause human disease. Of course, there's some that could potentially cause human disease, but have not spilled over into the human arena. So Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome was a virus that emerged out of the Middle East, and it's a respiratory syndrome much like COVID-19, but typically in patients who are in intensive care units who get it and get infected or in compromised, just like COVID-19. Severe acute respiratory syndrome is SARS. That was the first virus, SARS-CoV-1. And that, of course, had some pretty dramatic effect on the individuals that got infected, severe respiratory issues, and respiratory distress that we see now in SARS-2. And then there's common cold viruses, which each of us probably have had in our lives, and sometimes you get these multiple times within 1 year. But there's 229E, NL63, OC43, and HQU1. And some of these are actually on diagnostics, and these are common cold viruses. And so if you go to the doctor and you get a test for a respiratory panel, some of these coronaviruses are on that panel and do cause a cold-like symptoms in people. The novel coronavirus is a new strain that's not previously been identified in humans, and the origins are still being worked out, likely an animal that passed over to humans, and of course then led to human transmission, a spillover event. And then the virus spread around the world fairly quickly, much like any of the viruses that we have, because it's respiratory and like a cold, it can spread quickly between people. It doesn't require a vector like a mosquito or a tick. It just spreads directly to each other, and that usually goes pretty fast. And with global travel and global commerce, that happened a lot quicker than it had in the past. Again, we're learning more about the disease every day and learning more about the virus and how to manage this fast pathogen. Why does this matter? I get asked this question a lot too, and why it matters is that we've had a really good impact on respiratory diseases in the past 30 years. And respiratory diseases do kill a lot of people every year. This includes pneumonia and other bacterial and viral diseases that affect the lungs. And you know, we were really down to the point where it was like the last area that we had that was you know, really causing issues in children. And of course, you can see over the years from 1990 to 2017, we really reduced the number of children who are impacted by respiratory diseases. And we've also decreased the number of children under the age of 5. This is a really big killer in the 80s and 70s for killing children. And you can see that for people that are 50 to 70, we really have reduced the number of diseases, of the deaths that are due to pneumonia. But what's really unfortunate, as you can see, that the 70-plus-year-olds, anyone who's 70 to 85 or higher, those individuals do still have a large chance of dying from a respiratory pneumonia in their lifetime. And it's still the leading infectious disease death in that age group. So we were making some strides in reducing that, and there's some vaccines that came into play that are given to those over 50 and 60. And those are reducing those infections quite a bit. And now this disease could actually bring that back up to where we've actually had a loss in our reductions of infections over the past 20 years. So this is why this is mattering so much. Getting back to history repeating itself, I always like to apply, we apply new approaches in this, and this is the old doctor outfit that was used during the plague pandemic. It actually probably, in retrospect, there's evidence that it probably had some impact on protecting the clinicians that were actually treating plague victims. But nowadays we have this new technologies. This is the suit, the biosafety level 4 suits in the right corner that we wear. Purified air. It's what they call quote unquote spacesuits, because the company that used to make the blue suits here is making suits for NASA. But these are we apply new technologies, but we're still doing similar things, even though history has moved on for hundreds of years. And I always like to remind people that as much as we learn, we probably have learned it once before. And that's kind of a trend within outbreak and pandemic responses. So I'm getting asked a lot of times, is this really the scariest virus that we have, and a COVID-19 the worst case? And it honestly is not. The World Health Organization has been looking at disease X for some time now, and there's this idea that one day a virus will spill over that will have the respiratory or spreading of like smallpox, or of course like flu, and then have the high mortality, morbidity, the death rates, causing people illnesses that we have seen across the ages, from young children all the way to older adults. And if we see that disease, that's disease X, and it could kill millions. It probably will kill more than COVID-19 in theory. So it's a concern that us virologists, because there'll probably be a virus, from our experiences, viruses tend to do this, that we're concerned about and keeps us up at night. And there's all kinds of things about how to look at this, and we're looking at pathogen ideas, how to reduce our risk, how to make sure we have ways to respond to the risk, and these are all efforts that have been going on for more than 20 years. So zoonotic diseases are kind of important for us to understand, and they're really spread between animals and people, and sometimes people to animals. It's not uncommon that happens as well. And this includes livestock, includes domesticated animals, and of course includes wildlife. So we have to watch out for the transmission that could occur between this boundary between humans and animals. And typically the flu is one of the most important ones of this, because the flu circulates within pigs, within chickens, within poultry, ducks and livestock, and it'll then reassort itself and then reinfect humans. And usually that's a dead end. Doesn't happen very often that something positive happens when that reassortment occurs in those animals and comes into humans. But occasionally, once in a while, it'll infect a person that then leads to easier transmission for the virus and can spread between humans easier. So this is what we look for every year in the flu global search for flu viruses. And what is a spillover? First of all, I always like to show people great books to read. This is David Craven's book on spillover. It's a great book talking about animal infections and the next pandemic that could occur. And I think it's a good understanding of some of the chances that we've missed, because people put things together and figured it out, and also some of the scary things that could happen, and why disease X is such a concern. But really, viruses they live at nearly every animal, even in plants, there's viruses that live in plants. They don't typically transmit to humans, but these animals are existing in almost everything, even insects and vectors like mosquitoes and ticks and fleas. And what happens, these viruses go from animal to animal. They find a fit, and when they find that fit, they actually can stay in that animal and either cause disease or just transmit to another animal, which is the ideal situation for a virus, is just to basically continue to replicate and not really kill its host, but just to replicate and easily replicate. And then occasionally it spills over from that animal population into another animal population or into the vector and then into humans, and of course amplification from human to human. The probability of something going from the ability to jump from an animal to human to human transmission is very low, but when it occurs, it's usually very dangerous for mankind. And so it's something we need to keep a watch out for. And of course, in our global society we live in now, where everything is basically 24 to 48 hours away, you can have quick spread of these viruses if one was to get loose. And that's what we have with COVID-19. So how do we protect ourselves against this? We use an approach called One Health. This is an approach where we actually think about how we're connected to animals, how we're connected to the environment, and how we're connected to each other. And it's a holistic approach of looking at solutions that are sometimes simple and can make a difference in how we treat the environment and how we treat each other and how we treat the animal population. So it's the idea, One Health is the idea of the health of people is connected to the health of animals and, of course, the shared environment, which includes plants. So when we protect one, we protect all. And that's an important aspect of this. If we look at these Venn diagrams, there's these opportunities for things to mix and to be part of each other. And if we make sure we take care of each of these areas, the environment, our livestock, our pets, our domesticated animals, and of course, wildlife, we can then make sure that we're in the environment itself, we can then make sure that we're healthy. So it's this One Health, healthy approach to living. So vector-borne diseases are an area of that exists within One Health as well. So we have to worry about ticks and mosquitoes and fleas. These are vectors that can feed on an animal and then feed on a human and transmit bacteria, parasites, and of course, viruses. And so we need to be aware of this, and we need to make sure we're monitoring those vectors and making sure that we do surveys to see what these vectors look like and what they're carrying. We can do this now with new approaches in science. We can actually take a tick, we can do sequencing on it, we can do PCR to look for specific pathogens, or we can do sequencing to look at every pathogen that animal might have, and then understand what is the chances, the probability of infection within the population, both in the animal population, but also in the human population. And then, of course, we can work towards trying to eradicate those vectors and making sure we protect our pets, we protect those that are outdoors, and of course, protect wildlife. So this is what we call vector control or vector-borne disease control. And spillovers are kind of interesting because they do happen rarely. That's the it's kind of like, imagine putting a marble at the top of this diagram here, and this is a diagram that has been shown multiple times and showing how spillover events occur. If you put a marble in A, the column A, it goes straight through and you have a spillover event. But that's not how it happens. There's so many things that you can actually modify to decrease the chance that something from a bat, for example, in the middle here, will go from the top all the way down to the bottom and transmit into an animal and then into a human or directly into humans. And so we look at these things and we can actually modify these. These are things that we can modify. We can modify the reservoir density, the distribution of these animals, sometimes, not wildlife in general. We can also look at the prevalence of the pathogen. Can we monitor the pathogen in those animals? And when we see that pathogen, can we do something about trying to control that? Basically the survival of the pathogen, understanding how the virus or bacteria survives and how we can interrupt that survival process. And of course, how to avoid some spillover events by making sure we don't come into contact with each other. So these are all things that are within our control, and there's many more that we can use in One Health to actually prevent spillover events. So One Health is kind of an interesting concept. It's not just for us, scientists sitting in the lab or sitting in the field trying to figure this out. This is for everybody. This is reliant on veterinarians to a high degree, agricultural workers, pet owners, making sure your animals are vaccinated and your animals are taken care of and you're not letting them getting sick and you have them checked out by a vet if they do get sick. Healthcare workers, making sure that the drugs are being taken by the people that are prescribed medications, antibacterials, so that they don't stop taking their antibacterials before they're effective. And of course, policymakers, the people who actually pay the bills in the end of the day. And of course, us laboratory scientists, ecologists, and epidemiologists. So we can all work together. And right now, there's even a great movement amongst children and helping children understand how we can work together and make this One Health approach work and make a healthier society and world. One Health is really, again, anybody can do it. So we encourage everyone to be involved in this. But it's really about coordinating, communicating, and collaborating. So it's all about coordinating approaches that we can try in the field to make them make the environment safer and make our world safer, collaborating, working together, and of course communicating, sharing ideas. So again, anyone can participate in the One Health approach, which is an important aspect of this. And so if you want to know more about One Health issues, there's a variety of topic areas within One Health: zoonotic diseases we've talked about here, AMR, food safety and security, vectorborne diseases, environmental health, one of the areas I started in before I went to graduate school to become an immunologist and virologist. I did that was food safety, environmental health, how we take care of sewage, how do we make sure we have good drinking water, those kind of questions. Chronic diseases are a big impact on infectious diseases. As you're seeing now, with COVID-19, people who have chronic diseases are at more impact for infection and negative outcomes. So taking care of your chronic issues, obesity, diabetes, those type of things are important for infectious disease as well. Mental health and occupational health are just important aspects of this too. Having a resilient lifestyle and including a mental resilience is important, and we're able to respond. So there's so much more to be learned about this, and so we encourage you to be part of it. So in our process, if you think about this, we work in One Health, and we work in the pandemic cycle of working with outbreaks. And we want to stay in the blue areas. We want to stay in the preparedness area, the prevention and mitigation area the most. We want to spend as little time as response and recovery. But the reality is that we do respond. We usually respond quickly. Within a couple of years, we usually are able to respond to a virus or a new pathogen and deal with it. But the recovery phase can take years. For the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2015, we basically have been in recovery phase for the past 4 years. So it's a long recovery from an outbreak when it does occur, even in a small area. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. And we did respond in the outbreaks in West Africa. MRI Global did, and the whole point of that is to save lives and have faster treatments. And so this is the Ebola treatment units in the far background of this picture, but we deployed some of our mobile lab systems. And you can see these in the forefront. And these mobile lab systems were shipped by plane. They were then driven by tractor trailer to the location, and literally the patient sample could take up to 2 days to get to us before we could run them. But now we could be right next to the Ebola treatment unit because we were at National Labs before. But now we're right across the street, literally across the street. The sample could be run to us. We could have an answer within a day. So this is an important aspect of being able to respond to an outbreak and have novel ideas. And this was an engineering approach that was used by our staff. For the response to any outbreak, but right now for COVID-19, we've been part of the Diagnostic Capabilities, developing new emergency use authorization for companies that want to move their licensed, or they want to get a license for deploying a diagnostic test. We've been working on that. We've been working on treatments through a BARDA proposal and a grant that's been awarded. We're looking at prevention, working with commercial partners and academic partners to look at ways in which we can prevent using vaccines or therapeutics, and of course training. We've been training some of our colleagues who are doing this and trying to make responses quicker and faster. And then we've been deploying some of our engineering approaches, which is the mobile labs and the mobile containment units to carry people back and forth in our mobile lab that goes out in the field. It's important for everybody to understand the risk assessment cycles. This is all about risk assessment. Infectious diseases, we learned this in the laboratory from day one, but it's about gathering information, quality information. WHO, the CDC information is a great place to get that information. Evaluating a risk. If you're going to the grocery store, what are your risks? Your risks are you could get COVID-19. How can I mitigate those risks? I can mitigate those risks by wearing a mask and washing my hands thoroughly before I go, during my visit, and actually before and after I go, and then not touching my face. Then you actually implement those measures, and you go to the grocery store, you do those things, You make sure you try to learn something new every time, and of course, review those risks every time you do something new, and of course, come back and gather more information. So this is the risk assessment cycle, and it's part of the things we want to do with COVID-19. And you can practice this in your home and in your life right now and be a warrior against this virus. We are now working on new technologies. So MRI Global is very interested in, of course, prevention and preparedness. We're looking at ways in which we can detect viruses and bacteria that are in people before they're actually infected and understand whether they're going to have a negative or a positive outcome. So like a check engine light in your car. And of course, understanding the whole range of disease that could occur when you get infected. So some people get infected and nothing happens. And this is not uncommon. And of course, then there's people who get infected, survive, and actually have a lot of issues after they survive, and they have long-term effects. We're seeing this COVID-19. So we're developing diagnostic assays that will one day be at your fingertips in your home, connected maybe to your mobile device that can do this. And it's one of the things we're really excited about. We're calling it next generation high-resolution diagnostics. And then we're also trying to look at new ways of thinking about things. So it's not just all about the science in the lab. Sometimes it's about the applying new technologies. So now we're applying artificial intelligence. We're applying augmented reality, extended reality to the diagnostic person who's running the assays. So can you put a pair of goggles on someone and teach them how to run diagnostics? And then we wouldn't have had this shortage of people being able to perform diagnostic tests. So this is one of the things we're working on now, and it's kind of exciting with some of our partners. I can't go away from this talk without talking about prevention and changing behaviors, because this is what's so important in every pandemic and every outbreak. It's important to know that you have the power to protect yourself and your loved ones. Wash your hands, use soap if you can and water. It's the ideal way to do it, but if you have to, use hand sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol. Wear a mask. I can't express that our leadership within public health is 100% correct on this. It has happened over and over and over. We've seen this in 1918. We've seen it with other outbreaks. Wearing a mask makes a difference, so wear a mask. Stay home if you're feeling ill. Don't jeopardize those around you. You might have sinus attack. You might have allergies for the season. You might have a cold. You might have the flu. But all these things, it's best to stay home. It's best not to expose others to it. 14 days at least if you to avoid coming in contact with others. Cleaning and disinfecting is important. Even though we're realizing now that the virus doesn't spread as much on surfaces and through that mechanism, it's mostly through for person-to-person transmission, aerosol transmission, respiratory transmission. It's still important to clean and disinfect. And of course, have a family plan and have a personal plan. So take care of yourself and your family and make sure you have a plan in dealing with outbreaks and responses. Much like we would for a hurricane or for a tornado, we should think about it in the same manner. Thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, please let me know. My name is Gene Olinger. You can be reached at this email, and I'd love to answer questions.